Night shift workers of Reddit. What was the most paranormal thing to have happened to you? I work in an old, sprawling psychiatric hospital. One night, about halfway through my shift, I was called up to the detox unit. It's standard practice for staff to do a check every 15 minutes on all the patients. Make sure they're breathing, not in distress, that sort of thing. I had just arrived on the unit and wasn't sure which rooms were occupied, so I figured I'd do a quick walkthrough. As I passed by one of the rooms, I noticed the bedroom lights were off, but the bathroom light was on. The bathroom door was cracked open just a little. I knocked gently and reached for the door handle, ready to open it. Suddenly, the door jerked in my hand, as if something had yanked it from the other side, and then it slammed shut with force. At the same time, I heard what sounded like someone punching the bathroom wall. I hesitated, then opened the door. There was no one inside. Just an empty, quiet room. One of the longtime techs, who had been there for over 20 years, later told me that someone had died in that room a while back. I'm not the superstitious type, and I don't typically buy into ghost stories, but that moment, that floor, it was different. I worked in K-9 security for years. I'm not one to believe in the paranormal, but I've definitely had some unsettling experiences. One site I patrolled a few nights a week was an old, historical farmhouse. To get there from the main road, you had to walk about a kilometer down a beat-up dirt road, flanked by woods for a couple hundred meters on each side. It was more of a path than a road, really. Locals whispered about it being haunted. One night, it was incredibly dark. I can't recall if it was overcast or if there was no moon, but it was pitch black. About 2/3 of the way to the farmhouse, my dog, Brew, started acting strange. I could feel him tense up through the leash. He began letting out low growls every few steps, and I saw his ears twitching as my light swept back and forth. It was so dark, but I was sure his hackles were raised. Maybe 100 meters after I noticed him getting agitated, he surged ahead of me, something he only did when he sensed a threat. He stayed about 2 meters in front, then stopped and growled into the darkness. I scanned the area with my light, but saw nothing. After years of working with Brew, I trusted his instincts more than anyone's. During one of my scans, I saw about 6 pairs of eyes reflecting my light in the woods. I'm almost certain they were coyotes, but I still got a serious case of the shivers. Brew, and I turned back and returned to the car. I logged it as a clear patrol. Supernatural or not, I wasn't about to let my partner tangle with half a dozen ghost coyotes. I was working the graveyard shift at a gas station around 3 a.m. A car pulled up to the pump, a guy got out and started filling up. Then the car and the guy just vanished. I was staring right at them, and they simply popped out of existence. The next day, I told my boss what happened. She went white as a sheet. She'd seen the same thing, the same description, the same car, the same pump, the same guy. I work nights in the locked unit of our nursing home. It's where the most vulnerable residents are, those with dementia, behavioral problems, mental illness. I'm essentially locked alone in a long, dark hallway, checking on everyone throughout the night. It's a large, 3-story building, and this wing is an isolated half of the top floor. No one likes working back there, especially at night. The patients require more care, and let's be honest, it's spooky. Being locked in creates a claustrophobic feeling that's unsettling on its own. So when something does happen, it's enough to really scare the crap out of you. Here are some of my experiences. 1. The voice in the hall. One night, I heard a man shout, "Hey, come over here," from the dead end hallway. There were no men on that hall, and all the patients were asleep. No TVs were on, no radios. There was no logical explanation. Later, when I told someone the story, they went pale. Apparently, a patient who died shortly before I started working there used to stand at his door and call for help in the exact same way. They even described his voice, and it matched what I heard. 2. The shushing spirit. We had a patient who passed away. She was very difficult, always telling people what to do, kind of bossing the other patients around. She'd tell people to speak louder or to shut up, things like that. One night, my husband, who works in a separate unit of the same building, and I were talking in the hall outside her old room. Our conversation was interrupted by a loud shush. It sounded exactly like her, like she was right next to us. Again, nobody was in the hall but us, and the patients were asleep. 3. The terrified roommate. A patient moved into a shared room. The woman she moved in with wasn't always friendly. She'd even become physical if the new roommate took food from others' plates. Not long after moving in, the new roommate passed away in that room. Suddenly, the less than friendly roommate was terrified to sleep there. She'd lived in that room alone before, hadn't witnessed the death, and was probably too far gone with dementia to even remember having a roommate. But she was still utterly terrified of that room at night. She refused to go to bed, which used to be difficult to get her out of, and if you did get her to lie down, she'd scream, "Don't turn off the lights. Don't turn off the lights." She'd spend most of the night trying to get out of the room. This was completely out of character. She usually liked being in bed and left alone. One night, she made it all the way out into the hall, walking without her wheelchair, almost falling over, but determined to get away from that room. She fought me when I tried to turn her around, gasping for breath, with pure fear in her eyes, a look I'd never seen before. I took her to watch TV, and she slept peacefully in a recliner with me. This lasted for about a month after her roommate died, and didn't stop until she moved rooms. The general theory was that her departed roommate was getting revenge. 4. The dying visions. It's true that people often see their family and loved ones when they're close to death. When they start seeing and talking to people who aren't there, that's often a sign that it's about to happen. 5. The phantom call bells. Call bells do go off in empty rooms, even the kind you have to physically pull down a sound and push back up to turn off, and even in locked rooms. 6. The man in the rooms. This is what scares me the most. There's something back there that bothers my residents at night. I have a Greek woman at the far end of my hall who doesn't speak English. She'll be talking up a storm. I have no idea what she's saying, loud enough to hear all the way down the hall. When I go down to check on her, she stops talking and pretends to sleep, only to start up again when I walk away. This continues for a while, and then she'll stop talking and go to sleep. A few minutes later, the woman in the next room will start talking to something. When she stops, the woman across the hall will start talking to something. They aren't just mumbling, it's a conversation. Talk, then pause to listen, then talk again. And no two are doing it at the same time. They're all in separate rooms with varying levels of dementia, so it's not like they're discussing it or know what's going on in the other rooms. It's literally like someone or something is going down the hall, room to room, waking people up to talk until they fall asleep, then moving on to the next. They also all talk about that man. That man was in my room. That man is standing in the corner behind you. That man told me to. They all say the same thing, without knowing the others are seeing the same figure. This happens regularly and never stops being creepy. I wonder what he says to them. My mother used to work as a night shift nurse at a subacute care center. She told me about one of the patients who would frequently call out to her, complaining about children running around and being loud, preventing her from sleeping. Of course, there were no children. My mother would just acknowledge the patient's concerns, and after working there for over 10 years, she told me that there was one particular wing in the building where every so often the patients would all report seeing children running around and making noise in the middle of the night. This happened years ago, and it wasn't even dark. I used to work at a certain place, and part of my routine was to stay after everyone else and clean the main area, vacuuming, taking out the trash, that sort of thing. I was usually the last one to leave. One day, as I was vacuuming, I heard one of the toilets flush, followed by the sound of the sink turning on. I paused, waited, but no one came out. I was supposed to be the only person left in the building. I went to check the bathroom, but it was completely empty. Then it happened again. The exact same sequence. Toilet flushed, water turned on. It was just one of many strange experiences I had at that place. I worked at Kohl's for 2 years, and right before Christmas, they'd have a big overnight shift to get all the new holiday merchandise onto the floor. One year, I volunteered. We were wrapping things up around 2:30 a.m. I was working in the back, near the bedding section, which in that store was right next to the stockroom in the back corner. To my left was an end cap with clearance picture frames, and I was a few aisles over trying to stuff in some comforters. I finished and stepped back to survey my work when a picture frame from the end cap just tipped over and crashed to the floor. No one was near me. Nothing had even touched the frames. I was too tired to really process it, so I headed to the housekeeping closet to grab a broom and dustpan. This closet was way in the back of the stockroom. We had these conveyor belts that hung clothes in plastic bags and ran along a track near the ceiling, which kept the stockroom from being completely packed. Housewares were on shelves, but the clothes hung from the conveyor belt. As I turned the corner to the closet, one bag of women's clothes was swinging wildly above me. No other bags were moving, and it was making a loud, rustling sound. If someone had just used the belt, I would have heard it. By this point, I was wide awake and completely freaked out. I grabbed the broom and ran back to where the picture frame had broken. But the broken glass was gone. Despite clearly hearing it shatter, there wasn't a single shard, and none of the other employees would admit to cleaning it up. I never worked another overnight shift after that, and I always felt incredibly uneasy whenever I had to use that conveyor belt. I was working a floor set at a large retail store. A friend and I were talking about our favorite horror movies. The theme song from A Nightmare on Elm Street popped in my head, and we both started singing it. As soon as we got to the line, 9, 10, never sleep again, a whole rail of clothing that was hanging on the wall fell to the floor. We weren't even close to it, and we hadn't touched or interacted with it at all that night. It was incredibly creepy. We'd always said that store had a ghost because other strange things had happened there. We even gave it a name, Toby. I work in a restaurant, and the late-night bakery staff often talk about the ghost of a little girl, but I didn't know this when I first started. One day, it was the middle of the afternoon, and since it was a slow period, I was doing prep work alone in the kitchen. I was at the prep table, kind of zoning out and listening to the distant music when I felt a sudden presence right next to me. Then, I swear I heard, in a little girl's voice, the most innocent, "Hi Josh, how are you?" I even felt her breath. It was so real and vivid, but when I turned around, there was no one there. I started telling people about it and found out that many of my coworkers had heard the same voice. From everyone's story, she, the ghost girl, seems to be very nice, but it still sent chills down my spine. This didn't happen at work, but I had a TAPS period when I was a teenager. I'd always heard to be careful, that negative spirits could follow you home. Oddly enough, I once met a real TAPS investigator on the way to a place called the Gates of Hell, and he told me that the cemetery near my house had the most paranormal activity he'd ever encountered. That's where we used to go. I experienced some minor strange occurrences, but nothing too major. Then, one night, I was sleeping in my bed when something hit me on the head and woke me up. I assumed something had fallen from my headboard and was still on my head. I reached up to remove it and grabbed what felt like a cold, dead, and clammy hand grasping the top of my head. I threw the arm off of me, and it sounded like it made a thud on the ground. Almost instantly, I felt like I had somehow leaped from lying on my back to my light switch across the room in one fluid motion. I think I might have woken up within a dream, and then the fear actually woke me up for real. This story isn't about me, but about someone I worked with at a group home for individuals with developmental disabilities. This particular home was considered high support, as the residents were relatively aggressive and had primarily behavioral needs. The home was located in a remote area, about 15 minutes from the nearest town, with limited cell phone reception and surrounded by forest, except for a few other houses on the road. There were usually 2 overnight staff members who would take turns being awake and asleep. The staff told me about one night when they heard a noise coming from one of the residents' rooms. The resident had apparently reopened a scab and used the blood to smear it all over the walls. One staff member went into the room to address the situation, and the resident said, "Don't worry, they're coming tonight." The other staff member went back into the open concept living room / kitchen / dining area to get the phone and call the on-call supervisor, as the incident required extensive documentation and notification. As the staff member walked back, they noticed that the sliding door was now ajar by about a foot, even though they had just been in that room, and the door was closed and locked. As the staff member approached to close the door, they saw a wolf, coyote, or coy wolf slowly lurking on the porch, moving towards the open door. They quickly closed and locked the door and ended up calling the police, unsure of what was happening. They had to clean the bloody hand smears off the wall, and the resident never mentioned the incident again. Just another night shift, I guess. I used to work the night shift at UPS as a manager, and I carried a radio to coordinate with the incoming trucks. The basic process, to give some context, involved me announcing which bay a truck arrived at, so the monitors could track the package's next destination. During that time, a colleague of mine would often bring breakfast. When she arrived, she'd announce it over the radio, so we could all come down to the break room and share the food. One night, as one of my trucks was pulling into the bay, I heard her voice loud and clear on the radio, announcing that there was food. I immediately headed to the break room to get something to eat. But when I got there, no one was around. I tried to reach my colleague on the radio, but there was no response. I then called her cell phone, but she didn't answer. At that point, I started to think I was about to be the victim of a prank. The next day, I found out that she had died in a car accident around the same time I heard the announcement. The news really shook me, and I couldn't understand what I had heard. I'm absolutely certain it was her voice on the radio that day, and no matter how many times I replay it in my mind, I'm sure of it. I believe there are things in this world that we as humans are not meant to understand or will never understand. This experience is something that has always fascinated me. I used to work as a cashier at a fast food restaurant. The fry cook was, to put it mildly, quite annoying. To get a rise out of him, I fabricated a spooky story about a former fry cook. In my tale, this unfortunate soul had accidentally severed his hand, replacing it with a rusty spatula. He was then tragically run over by a bus and now, as a ghost, haunts the restaurant every Tuesday night. His spectral presence, I explained, was heralded by 3 distinct signs: flickering lights, a silent phone call, and the arrival of the bus that ended his life. The fry cook was thoroughly spooked, so I eventually decided to let him in on the joke. However, as the night wore on, the 3 signs began to manifest. First, the lights started to flicker erratically. Then the phone rang, but there was only silence on the other end. Finally, and most unsettlingly, a bus pulled up outside. It turned out, though, that there were somewhat mundane explanations. The person on the bus was a job applicant, nervously holding a spatula, and he'd hung up the phone because he was too anxious to speak. As for the flickering lights, Nosferatu. I worked overnight as a valet at a large hotel on the beach. The 3rd floor had a reputation for shadow people. I heard there had even been a few suicides in the parking garage, which added an extra layer of creepiness to the job. On the plus side, I did get to valet for Mike Tyson, which was a really cool experience. I worked in a museum housed in an old building downtown with a rather eclectic history. It had been a vaudeville theater, then a used car lot, and then it sat abandoned and deteriorating for years before being renovated. The building's past seemed to contribute to the many strange occurrences we experienced there. I'm a natural skeptic, but some things defied easy explanation. After closing for the evening, while we were in the lobby counting cash drawers and closing up the gift shop, we'd often hear the sound of running footsteps on the floor above us, even though we were certain no one was up there. We'd lock up at night, and when we returned the next morning to open, we'd find things displaced, clothes strewn about, objects knocked over, and doors open that I knew I had secured the night before. A general feeling of unease permeated the place. We all felt it. The elevator was particularly active, moving between floors with no one inside, which, while possibly due to electrical issues, added to the overall creepiness, especially at night when you could hear it going up and down, ding ding. The most unsettling event, and the one I still struggle to explain, involved more than just me. If I'd been alone, I might have dismissed it as imagination, but others witnessed it too. We were standing on the 2nd floor landing, near the stairs leading to the 3rd floor. The museum was closed, and all visitors had left. As we stood there chatting, a little boy in a red shirt ran around the corner, near the elevator, and up the stairs to the 3rd floor. We all exchanged bewildered looks, confirming that we had both seen the same thing. Our initial thought was that we'd somehow missed a visitor, but it was a small museum, and this happened about 30 minutes after closing. There was only one way up to the third floor and one way down. We couldn't have missed anyone. We went upstairs to investigate, and of course, there was no one there. From then on, whenever strange things happened, we'd attribute it to the boy in the red shirt. My husband works the night shift at a train yard, and he shared a strange story about a light that several people witnessed in the early morning hours. He described the light as swiveling around, as if it were scanning the area. Its movement was also peculiar, almost like galloping, and it traversed a large wooded area much faster than any person could run. One of his co-workers got a closer look and thought it was a person on a phone, but the description of this person was eerily similar to the co-worker himself. At one point, the light moved smoothly under a train car and emerged on the other side. We've been trying to make sense of it. The most plausible explanation seems to be some kind of drone, but it's hard to believe someone could navigate a drone through dense woods and under a train car without crashing. And even if they could, why would they? The other, stranger theory is that someone somehow attached a light to a coyote. I used to work the night shift at a domestic violence shelter, which was housed in a former school building. One night, I heard a little girl laughing outside the office. I got up to investigate, and the girl turned and ran down the hall. From behind, I was convinced she was the daughter of one of our residents. She looked just like her. But she was wearing an odd, layered nightgown. She ran past the room I expected her to enter and into a living room area. I followed immediately, but when I entered, the room was completely empty. I used to work at a bakery, and one night, while taking a short break outside, I witnessed what I can only describe as a genuine UFO. It was a circular light, incredibly bright, about the size of an eighth of the full moon, hovering at an indeterminate altitude. My jaw dropped in disbelief. Then, and I'm absolutely serious about this, the object seemed to notice me. It began to shrink in size, not in brightness, but in diameter, until it resembled a star in the sky. Then it vanished completely. The entire event lasted approximately 15 to 20 seconds. I was working a few overnight shifts at another campus, where the dorm was much smaller and quieter, leaving me alone. On my first shift, a mysterious janitor appeared and told me about a ghost that supposedly roamed the old library. He said I might see her in the window and that she might try to enter the dorm, so I should be careful if I heard noises in the hallway. I dismissed it as nonsense. Around 4 or 5 a.m., as I was getting ready to doze off, it was still very dark outside. I kept an eye on the library windows, half expecting some ghostly apparition. Then I heard a tapping or knocking sound from down the hall. Bang, bang, bang. I assumed it was the janitor trying to scare me. I went to investigate, but the hallway was empty. I checked the security footage from the hall, outside, and the back room. The footage showed no one and hadn't for a long time. Outside the back room doors, there was a walkway with fresh snow and no footprints. The windows were surrounded by tall bushes. I told myself it was just the pipes. The next morning, I recounted the story to one of the staff members, laughing about how a janitor had tried to scare me with ghost stories. They were surprised to hear that Sue was in so early, and I described the man I had spoken to. "We don't have anyone working overnight," they said. I didn't believe them. I asked them to review the desk footage from when the janitor had come by. As we watched the recording of me looking up and talking to someone, the feed glitched out, stuttered, and became completely scrambled, obscuring everything. When the image cleared, I was seen waving, then sitting back down. No one entered or exited the frame, and no one appeared on any of the other security feeds. I'm the first one in the morning, and part of my routine is to check on the night shift employee to make sure everything is okay. One morning, I arrived to find his car still in the parking lot, but he was nowhere to be found. I decided to review the security camera footage, and what I saw was deeply unsettling. At 11:26 p.m., he suddenly sat straight up, began crying uncontrollably, and then ran out of the store. He had worked that shift for 2 years, so it's unlikely that anything ordinary would have frightened him. He's still missing, and the incident continues to disturb me to this day. I worked security at a youth camp that was in the process of closing down. The layout was strikingly similar to a prison, complete with barbed wire fences surrounding the entire grounds and massive double gates that could only be opened from the control booth. I was stationed alone in that control room for the 3 to 11 p.m. shift, and most of the time, I just watched movies on my computer. The place was inherently creepy, even at first glance. The control room itself was an isolated space, accessible only through a heavy steel door. On several nights, I'd hear someone trying to open the door from the outside, even though I was the only one who could release the lock. Another night, while I was engrossed in the film Clerks, I heard a door open down the hall. I got up just in time to see it closing, followed by a male voice that sounded like it was saying "Ichiwai." I decided to just sit back down and continue watching the movie. There wasn't much else I could do. The strangest occurrence involved the sound of a mop bucket being rolled across the floor. Each time I got up to investigate, I found nothing. This happened a few more times until I finally went to check it out. At the end of the hall, I found a mop bucket sitting in the middle of the corridor with a completely dry mop inside. I was certain it hadn't been there at the start of my shift. Other guards had their own unsettling stories about the place, too. The site is now a manufacturing plant for medical marijuana. I used to work and live at a wedding event center. The property was divided into 2 main areas, a house built in the 1920s and a former dairy farm that had been converted into a ballroom. Over time, the barns were transformed into wedding chapels and hotel-style suites. I was there day and night, so I experienced a wide range of events, both ordinary and extraordinary. The resident ghosts were mostly harmless and occasionally played pranks. One of the spookiest incidents occurred when I was cleaning offices alone in the pitch-black basement. A door slammed, and the distinct smell of cigarette smoke filled the air. I called out, thinking my boss might have returned, but there was no response. There were only 2 exits from the basement, and I was standing at one of them. I quickly checked the other exit, which was locked, and there was no one in sight. I even went out to the parking lot, but it was empty. One memorable prank took place in the older house. A girl was cleaning the changing rooms and bathrooms while the rest of us were in the dining room, setting up. We heard a door slam, followed by her scream. She ran into the dining room, saying that all the lights upstairs had gone out immediately after the door slammed. The only way for that to happen was if the breaker tripped or someone manually switched it off. I initially suspected another employee, known for his pranks, but he was outside by the barn carrying a load of items from the other building. There was no way he could have left the house without us seeing him. I checked the breakers and they were fine. It was impossible for all those lights to go out simultaneously. We never figured out who or what slammed the bathroom door upstairs, as no one was inside. Another time, I was organizing glassware behind the bar. I closed all the cabinets and walked through the back bar into the dining room. To my surprise, every cabinet was open again. I went back and closed them, only to find them all open once more when I returned to the front of the bar. Knowing I was alone, I said aloud, "Very funny. I have other things to do. Could you please leave them closed?" I went back, closed them again, and finally they stayed shut. Once I made a negative comment about the ghosts and had a clock thrown at me from across the room. Other people were present and were just as shocked as I was. After that, I made sure to be respectful. Many employees reported seeing the ghosts in the houses. 3 different employees who worked there at different times and didn't know each other described seeing an old man in a black suit with white hair. I was skeptical until the 3rd person described him and refused to go into the basement alone. My then boyfriend, while washing dishes, saw a little girl in a sundress. It was 3 a.m. and only the crew was present. She went down to the basement, and he refused to work in that building at night again. I investigated, but found no little girl. On only one occasion did I see a figure myself, along with another employee. We both reacted when a man in khakis, a blue button-up shirt, and dark brown hair vanished in a thin air right in front of us on the sidewalk. One of the most unsettling incidents involved 2 maintenance guys who were there early one morning. They saw wet, bare footprints and followed them down the hall and into a closet in the changing room. The closet was empty and there were no footprints leading out. They had unlocked the door themselves and knew no one else was there. I arrived shortly after and they showed me the footprints. It was very strange. The place has countless stories from employees, wedding guests, and even paranormal teams invited by the owners. I loved it there. It felt like a second home. I like to think that one day, when I die, I'll become one of the ghosts there too. During high school, I worked at a Tim Hortons. The store opened at 5 a.m., which meant someone had to arrive at 4 a.m. to bake all the donuts and muffins. One weekend morning, I arrived at 4 a.m. and started my usual tasks. Suddenly, the television and radio shut off, plunging the store into complete silence. Then, the lights began to blink erratically. At first, I assumed it was a power issue, but then I noticed that all the ovens and other equipment were still working perfectly. This continued for a good 10 minutes before everything returned to normal, leaving me quite shaken. My manager arrived a few hours later, and I told him everything that had happened. We reviewed the security camera footage to see if anything suspicious had occurred. The cameras only showed the lights flashing and me, well, let's just say, expressing my surprise. While most of the strange occurrences at my workplace are usually caused by people, I have developed a specific fear of supernatural, moving plushies, thanks to my time working nights. This incident happened when I first started the overnight shift. One night, I was gathering trash when the liquor department camera screen at the registers began to malfunction. The cashiers and I watched as the screen flickered and then went black for a few seconds. When the image returned, a Piku plushie, the small, yellow electric mouse Pokemon, was sitting directly in front of the camera in the liquor department, and there was no one around. I had no idea how it got there. The photo department employee retrieved it, and I put away that night. For the next 8 weeks, that same Piku plushie reappeared in a different, random department about once a week. The photo employee had marked the tag, so I knew it was the same one. It showed up in the strangest places, like on top of the doors leading outside, without triggering the alarms, and even in the adult diaper department. I usually ended up putting it back on the toy shelves. It became known among the staff and me as the Phantom Piku. Fortunately, a family eventually bought that specific plushie, and I never saw it again. However, I still get creeped out by Piku. Ironically, we later received a Bennett plushie, but that one never exhibited any unusual behavior. During my deployment in Saudi Arabia, one of my guard posts was a tower located on the roof, accessible only by 10 flights of stairs. The bathroom was downstairs. One night, around 2 a.m., I went down to use the restroom. While I was inside, I heard distinct shuffling and footsteps passing the bathroom and ascending the stairs towards my post. I immediately thought, damn, it's the boss, checking to see if we're asleep. I finished up and hurried back to my post, fully expecting to see our flight chief. But there was no one there. Not a single person had come up. It was just one of many ghostly encounters I experienced at that base. 6 years ago, I was working in software QA, testing an app that used the camera to create stop-motion animation by taking pictures at manually set intervals. It was a simple app designed for kids. One night, I set the app to take a picture every 60 seconds, pointed the camera at the main office floor, and left it running overnight to soak test. The next morning, I found the app still running, stopped it, and reviewed the footage to see how the app performed. The video showed the office, initially lit with some workers, then fewer workers, then no workers, followed by the cleaning crew, lights off, darkness, 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 sunrise, and then lights on. But then, wait a minute. Something was different between the lights off and lights on parts of the video. I rewound and watched again and again. There it was. A chair had moved at least 10 feet and spun around between those two time points. I asked around, but there was no overnight shift hiding in the dark, no one present after the cleaning crew, no one at all. I showed my boss, and he just laughed it off. That evening, before leaving work, I set up another soak test, again pointing the camera in the same direction. This time, I made sure there was absolutely no one working in that section of the office at night, and I neatly pushed all the chairs in before I left. The next day, I reviewed the footage. Again, everyone left, the cleaning crew cleaned, lights went off, darkness, sunrise, lights on. But again, the chairs had moved, not just one, but several, with one moving even farther than the night before. And again, I checked with everyone, and there was no logical explanation. I continued setting up the test every night that week, with Friday morning being the last time I would see the overnight footage. And of course, the chairs had moved again. Since it was the last day of testing, I decided to check with IT and asked if there were any key card scans after 9 p.m. They told me the only scans were from the cleaning crew. No one could explain what was happening. We moved offices several months later, and the mystery of the moving chairs remained unsolved. I was working MS, and around 0300, I was outside our station, having a cigarette. The garage and workshop were about 30 feet away from me. Suddenly, the garage door started to open. It got about halfway up and then stopped. I opened the station door, thinking my partner might be up, but he was still sound asleep on the couch, exactly where he'd been for the past few hours. Then, the garage door began to close on its own. I stared at the old, run-down building that housed our ambulances and supplies. The heavy metal door next to the garage slowly swung open, and I heard a gruff, masculine voice yell, "Medic girl, come here," from the direction of the garage. It was loud enough to wake up my partner, who came outside, wondering who was calling for me. We both heard it. The voice called out again, "Medic girl, come here." My partner and I just looked at each other, stunned. The inside of the garage was completely dark, so we couldn't see anything. We called the police, explaining that we thought someone was in the garage. A couple of officers arrived, and we all started walking towards the garage. Then, the garage door, which was about 3/4 of the way open, slammed shut. We all turned around and ran. One of the officers called the K9 unit, and the K9 officer came down with his dog. They were going to search the building, but the dog wouldn't go closer than about 10 feet. When the dog got near the building, it got so scared it peed, then jerked backward so hard that its head slipped out of its collar. The dog ran back to the car, frantically scratching at the door to get back inside. I'm not kidding. We ended up calling a priest because none of us wanted to deal with whatever was in that garage. I used to work at a psychiatric hospital, covering various floors as needed. One shift, I was assigned to the children's unit, where I wasn't familiar with the patients. One young boy, about 8 years old, required constant observation due to his aggressive tendencies. When he was asleep, this usually meant a staff member would sit in a chair and watch him from the doorway. His chart indicated he experienced auditory and visual hallucinations. Throughout the night, he would frequently sit up, turn his head from side to side, scanning the room, and then look at me, saying, "Oh, that was just you." I initially attributed this to his psychotic symptoms. Then, I saw a dark shadow dart across the room while he remained asleep. The next morning, he was sitting at the unit table. I tried to make small talk, asking how he slept. Tearfully, he replied, "I couldn't sleep because the shadow people wouldn't let me." Then, staring blankly into space, he said in a flat tone, "Disappointment." He then looked at me and smiled. I was incredibly disturbed by the entire shift. I shared my experience with a regular nurse at the hospital, and she said, "Oh, boy's name is in room hashtag. Isn't he? Yeah, that room is haunted. Most kids have trouble sleeping in there." She explained that the children's unit used to be the old electroconvulsive therapy ECT unit back when the procedure was new and often inhumane. The building was constructed in the 1940s, an era known for its often cruel treatment of patients. I used to work nights at a small video store. I never minded the night shifts or working alone. In fact, I enjoyed the slower pace. One night, around closing time about 11 p.m., I had turned off all the lights. Enough light from the street lights filtered through the front windows for me to finish my closing tasks. I was running the closing report, lounging on the floor behind the counter, waiting for it to finish printing. Our store was small, and the front counter was right near the entrance. Suddenly, I heard children laughing and giggling. My first thought was, crap, I should have locked the doors. Now I have to chase some kids out. I got up from the floor and saw a little blonde head pass by on the other side of the counter. I was convinced these were real children. But as soon as I stood up to look around, there was no one. Absolutely no one. And this is hard to describe. The sudden silence was terrifying. It felt heavy, unnatural, expectant. I felt incredibly vulnerable and exposed, like I was being watched. I couldn't get out of there fast enough. For context, our store had wire racks for shelving, only the one front glass entrance, and literally nowhere for anyone to hide, though I did a quick check of the store and the bathroom to be sure. It all happened so quickly. I'm generally level-headed and don't spook easily. I'm more the type to try to figure things out. But seeing that head go past the counter into the store and then finding nothing was incredibly unsettling. I'm not a night shift worker, and after what I saw, I never want to be. I was riding my bike home around 1 a.m. It was the school holidays, so my sleep schedule was non-existent, a decision I still regret, as my sleep schedule is still a mess. I was passing a store where someone was locking up when, out of nowhere, a cat landed on the guy's face. I didn't even see it fall. It was just suddenly there. The guy yelled, then pushed the cat off. He calmed down quickly when he saw it was just a cat, and it ran off. After the cat left and the guy finished locking up, I was still laughing. He started walking towards his car. Then, the cat was on his face again. It just appeared out of nowhere. There was literally nowhere it could have jumped from. And it shrieked at him, a high-pitched, gargling meow of death right on this poor guy's face. He pulled it off again, and it ran away. The guy walked toward his car. I stopped to watch all this, and he waved at me. There was a cat sitting on his car. I don't know what crazy cat lady this guy had angered, but there was a cat just sitting on his car, staring at him. I watched him pick it up, put it on the floor, get in his car, and to drive off like it was nothing. If this guy reacted to all that like it was normal, I have no idea what kind of crazy stuff happens to him, and I don't want to know. I was a night shift worker, but one winter evening, I had to work late, so it was dark when I finished. I was a scheduler in a small, perfectly cube-shaped office at the back of a manufacturing warehouse. The warehouse floor was filled with woodworking stations, but a wide aisle ran down the middle, connecting the front sales office to my cube, as I called it. During the day, with the warehouse lights on, air compressors running, and air lines hissing, the shop was never quiet, even during breaks. The giant halogen lights even hummed. But at night, when the floor manager turned off the lights and the air lines deflated, the shop became eerily silent. Only two dim emergency lights provided intermittent illumination in the aisle. Having worked there for 8 years, I knew the normal noises. I was used to the thump-sweep click of the office door opening onto the shop floor, the whump-whump scree of someone climbing the loading dock stairs, and even the sound of individual employees' footsteps. The office staff, mostly women, wore flats, flip-flops, or sandals and walked quickly. The boss wore Oxfords and walked with a slower, more confident cadence. In the quiet of the evening, sound traveled easily in the empty warehouse. That winter night, the shop was dark and cold. I grabbed my coat and purse and stepped out of my cube. I set my purse on the table just outside my office and started to put on my coat when I heard distant clicking footsteps. I turned towards the front of the building where the office was, expecting to see who had come out. The clicking sounded like Mary from the office, but the pace was off, slow, pacing, wandering. I hadn't heard or seen the office door open. From my office, I could see the light from the front office when that door opened, giving me a visual cue. The footsteps were wrong. They sounded like someone walking from the front office door, turning into the aisle, but I saw no one. The security lights didn't illuminate that section of the floor. The steps continued, coming closer. Whoever, it should have been visible in the dim light by now. I called out the names of a few office girls, hoping for an echo. The footsteps stopped. No one appeared, and none of the office staff were out there. The worst part was that I had to walk right through the area where I'd heard the steps. I'm not proud to admit I jogged/ran through the shop that night. When I reached the front office, I asked if anyone had been on the floor. The answer was no. Years later, I told an abridged version of this story at dinner with the owner, the boss, and their family. We were talking about strange events at the company, and the owner, completely serious, suggested it might have been his deceased father who had founded the company 20 years prior. Freaky. A new patient called out, agitated. When we entered, she kept repeating, "Get her out of here." We initially suspected sundowning, a symptom of dementia. An hour later, she called again, still distressed and repeating the same phrase. Finally, we asked who she was referring to. She described seeing a woman lying next to her bed, who would then get up, walk across the room, face the wall, and cry. We discovered the room's previous occupant had died a week earlier. This patient had a history of schizophrenia and would often throw herself on the floor beside her bed. She also had a mirror on the wall and would stand in front of it, crying. The mirror was no longer there, but that's precisely where the new patient indicated the figure stood. It seemed our former patient, who struggled with schizophrenia, was haunting the room. During high school, I worked at a restaurant located next to a house with a reputation for being haunted. It was a whole production. They ran ghost tours and everything. The night shift workers insisted the entire area was haunted, including our restaurant. They talked about seeing shadow people, the Hat Man, and objects moving on their own. I was pretty skeptical until a new employee freaked out after seeing a shadow person near the kitchen pans and quit on the spot. The next day was brutal. We were incredibly short-staffed because the restaurant was too cheap to hire more than 1 or 2 people for the night shift. I was working overtime on a Saturday morning in our office building. My usual spot is on the 2nd floor, which has an open railing overlooking the 1st floor, a space filled with more cubicles. The office was mostly dark, except for the 1 or 2 lights that are always left on. I prefer working with just my desk lamp, so I didn't bother with the overheads. About 2 hours into my work, I heard a loud metal clang, like a file cabinet slamming shut. At first, I thought nothing of it, assuming someone else was in the office since people sometimes come in on Saturdays. When I heard the slam again, I figured it was coming from downstairs. I turned around and noticed that the lights were off. I leaned over the railing to see if anyone was working down the hall, but I didn't see anyone. As I leaned back, I saw a man standing in the middle of the cubicles. He was wearing a white t-shirt, and he looked up at me, then calmly walked towards the exit hallway. I didn't recognize him. Even in the dim light, I'm sure I would have recognized any of my coworkers. New employees wouldn't have keys or come in on weekends. It didn't seem like he was a thief. He wasn't carrying anything, and a thief would have run as soon as he saw me. This man just walked away casually. Plus, the doors are always locked and alarmed, requiring a key card for entry. There are also security cameras throughout the building. I even looked out the window towards the front door to see if I could spot him leaving, but he never came out. He also would have seen my light from the 2nd floor and me working. It just didn't make sense. The cleaning crew always turns on the lights. The next morning, I scanned the faces of everyone in the office, trying to see if anyone resembled the man I saw, but I had no luck. I work in a laundry room at a hotel. Second shift goes until 11:30 p.m., and sometimes I stay even later to catch up on hours. One night, I was the only one left, emptying the washers and loading the dryers. The largest dryer has a big, reflective back, so when you open it, you can see yourself and everything behind you. I was loading the dryers, and when I got to the last one, I opened the door and started putting the wet laundry in. As I straightened up after grabbing the last of the towels, I glanced at the reflection and saw someone standing about 8 to 10 feet behind me. I froze, staring at the reflection, thinking it was just a weird distortion since the reflection wasn't perfect. Then, the figure started walking away. That's when I spun around to see who it was, but there was nobody there. It sent a chill right down my spine. I used to work the graveyard shift at a 5-story hospital that had a reputation for a haunted room on the 2nd floor, room 220. So many strange things had happened to patients in that room that the staff eventually learned to avoid assigning it to anyone. About 90% of the time, room 220 remained vacant, while every other room on the 2nd floor would have 1 or 2 patients. The numerous complaints I heard from patients and staff who had been in that room included indistinct giggling and laughter of children through the wall, even though the adjacent rooms were occupied by heavily medicated adults who were barely conscious. Deep, long scratch marks appearing on the bathroom door. The sound of an adult woman crying, cleaning equipment falling or being knocked over. Apparitions. One night, a staff member and her boyfriend snuck into room 220 to be intimate. They didn't turn on the lights. Not even 10 minutes later, a deafening shriek echoed through the 2nd floor. They both ran out of the room in terror. The staff member was hysterical, and her boyfriend was deathly pale. They claimed that just before they were about to get intimate, they saw a middle-aged man standing over them, staring. Security was called and searched the room, but found nothing. The staff member was reprimanded and avoided the second floor afterward. Then there's the story told by a doctor who had worked at the hospital for 15 years and claimed to have been there when the incident occurred. I honestly suspect he was just messing with us and had read too many creepypastas. He said that about 10 years prior, room 220 was assigned to a 28-year-old male patient with late-stage juvenile onset Huntington's disease. He was essentially in a vegetative state, on life support, seemingly only there so his family could have a few more days to decide whether to remove it. One night, a nurse was doing her rounds and found this patient half naked in room 220, writing on the walls with his own blood. The writing wasn't coherent, just scribbles of random signs, numbers, and bloody handprints. The nurse panicked and tried to stop him, but he pulled out a shard of glass and threatened her. She fled and called security. By the time they arrived, the patient was dead on the floor, having severed his radial artery and bled out. Security called the police, who investigated the room and questioned the distraught nurse and the rest of the night staff. The death was eventually ruled a suicide, and the room was thoroughly cleaned. I'm a former theater nurse, and this happened when I was working on call, out of hours. We got a call around 2 a.m. for an emergency tracheostomy. I arrived first and opened up the theater, starting to check equipment as the other staff trickled in. The theater was in the hospital's basement, and at that hour, the only people down there would have been us setting up. The 10 theaters are laid out in an H shape with only 2 ways in and out. I knew the other exit was locked because I'd been gathering equipment from that end of the theater. One of the nurses was at the top left side of the H, and I was on the right side, getting airway extras when I saw an old lady in regular clothes walking along the side where my colleague was. Given the emergency, I walked towards her. She was looking straight ahead as she shuffled along. I said, "Excuse me, you can't be in here." "Where are you going?" Just then, the anesthetist shouted my name, so I rushed back into the theater and gave him the equipment he needed. I went back out of the theater and asked my colleague, who had been near that end, if he'd seen an old lady. He thought I was crazy. I checked the exit and the recovery room, but she was gone. When we finished the operation, we searched everywhere, but there was no sign of her. After that, I always waited for someone else to arrive before opening up the theater. It really spooked me. I'm glad I don't work there anymore. I was working late one night at the newspaper office. Everyone else on the floor had left, and it was probably around 1 or 2 a.m. There were rumors that the building was haunted, something about being built on an old Native American burial ground, the usual kind of nonsense people come up with when they're bored. Anyway, I stepped into the elevator to head down to the parking garage and pressed the button. The entire floor, except for the elevator corridor, was pitch black and eerily silent. After about 20 seconds of staring into that darkness, I realized the elevator doors hadn't closed. I pressed the garage button again, but nothing happened. The doors remained wide open, revealing those completely dark hallways. My mind started racing. I could easily imagine all sorts of horrific creatures emerging from the shadows. I started frantically pressing the button again and again and again, but the doors still wouldn't close. I was convinced some demonic force was holding them open. My heart pounded in my chest. Then, I realized I hadn't been frantically pressing the button for the parking garage. I've been hitting the door open button the whole time. I cursed under my breath, finally hit the correct button for the parking garage, and the door slid shut. My heart rate spiked again as I thought, this is the part in the movie where the monster actually does burst through the door. Thankfully, nothing happened, and I got out of there as fast as I could. My dad got a job in Charleston, and his boss let him stay at his house. Apparently, the subdivision was built on an old plantation. Charleston has a reputation for being haunted, largely due to its history with the slave trade. One time, my dad was closing up the office late. He felt a presence behind him. The air turned cold, and the hair on the back of his neck stood up. He heard footsteps, saw a shadow fall over him, and turned around, ready to defend himself, but there was no one there. He said he didn't even bother locking the doors that night. He was so freaked out. Also, his air mattress kept deflating, not from a leak, but because the cap was consistently unscrewed. He even tried taping it down, but it still happened. A friend of my parents had an even more disturbing experience. He had to have his house cleansed because he was being touched at night by something unseen. He'd wake up with bruises and hand marks on his legs and private areas. It was clearly sexual in nature, which terrified him. His wife confirmed his story. After the cleansing, whatever that involved, and moving out, the experiences stopped. I work in homes with children who have special needs. One of my clients was a little girl who was very difficult to understand. She spoke in fragmented sentences, rarely stringing more than a word or two together. She had a peculiar habit. She would get up in the middle of the night, walk to the air vent in the hallway, and have what sounded like full conversations. I'd hear her laughing, giggling, and chattering away. If anyone approached the hallway, especially if they turned on a light, she would immediately fall silent and become very angry. I always let her be. I didn't want to upset whoever or whatever she was talking to. I used to work in a cinema, a beautiful building from the 1930s. I once posted in a paranormal subreddit about how one of my colleagues was convinced the place was haunted. He had a couple of reasons. First, in one of the theaters, you'd sometimes see shadows moving across the screen as if someone was walking in front of it, even though nobody was there. Second, on a couple of occasions, the metal bars we used to secure the fire exit doors would fall off for no apparent reason. And not only would they fall, but they'd also fall to the side. It was very strange. When I left that job, I was a bit disappointed that I wouldn't get to see if anything else happened. But a month or two ago, that same coworker uploaded CCTV footage to YouTube, showing the bar falling off the fire exit door. I wasn't working, but visiting when a little over a year ago, I attended a convention at Fort George in Niagara-on-the-Lake. I bought a ticket for the ghost tour, where a guide and some security guards lead you through the historical buildings, sharing their history. About halfway through the tour, I found myself at the back of the group with only a security guard behind me. We entered a room, and while the tour guide was talking, I was only half listening. The first thing that caught my eye was a very old, rather grimy-looking mirror behind me. I glanced at it, seeing my reflection and the guards. No one else. Then, I felt something tugging on my costume skirt near my backside. I turned to look at the guard, giving him a strange look, thinking he was trying to grope me. But then I saw a fleeting image in the mirror, the face of a small girl. The guard just smiled and gestured for me to move forward with the group. At the end of the tour, I spoke to the tour guide, the guard, and 2 other women. I described what had happened, and the guard and guide laughed. They said that a little blonde girl is seen all the time there and is known for tugging on people's clothes or singing. One of the other women mentioned seeing her in a different room as well. I work at a coffee shop, so I can't imagine having a job that's constantly dealing with the paranormal. Imagine being that guard and witnessing someone having an experience like that. When I worked the 3rd shift at a jail, we had to take paperwork to the office, which was secured behind several interlocked doors and far from any inmates. Many people said the office was haunted, but I'd been there countless times and never experienced anything myself. One night, I was in the office, putting my paperwork in the superintendent's mailbox when I heard voices. But these weren't normal voices. They were electronic sounding, coming from the fax machine. I couldn't make out much, but I distinctly heard my name and the name of the guy I was working with. I got out of there as fast as I could, and it never happened again. On a slightly related note, there was this guy who worked the 3rd shift in the other section of the building, the holding section for those awaiting court. I worked in the felony offender unit. He used to call my work phone, an internal phone, so only 2 other people could call me, and then hang up, all while watching me creepily. He'd often go outside late at night to smoke, so one night I snuck out our back entrance and made a bunch of weird noises to scare him. He ran back inside, claiming he was calling the cops because there were people screaming and animals eating them, or something. The other staff calmed him down, but he kept warning everyone about it until he eventually quit. It was hilarious. I was working as a security guard at the time, covering someone's vacation, so it wasn't my usual post. The area was built in the early 1900s, and the buildings had since been renovated. I was stationed in an office within an old building, used to monitor the front gate. It was around 1 a.m., and I was browsing Reddit on the office computer when I heard a voice. It said, "Hello, is anyone there? I would appreciate it if you picked up. Hello." At first, I thought it was the phone on the desk. I picked it up, but there was only a dial tone. Then, I considered that it might be someone doing a radio check, but dispatch hadn't responded. As I was pondering this, I heard the voice again, this time with a sense of urgency. "Hello, please pick up, hello." I then thought someone outside needed to get through the gate. I felt pretty stupid for not considering that sooner. I peeked through the blinds, but saw no one. I went outside, and there was still no one. Not even a car besides mine. It was a one-way road, so there was no way a car could have approached without me seeing it. I was pretty unsettled at this point and left the office lights on for the rest of the night. A few days later, I was still covering the same shift, but nothing unusual had happened since. Then around 2 a.m., the office's old radio in the back corner, the kind with a volume dial that also served as the power switch, and a separate tuning dial with printed stations and a needle, turn on, playing oldies but goodies. I immediately got up and went over to the radio. The volume dial was set to off. I quickly turned the volume dial to on to try and turn it off. When I turned it on, it started playing regular, modern-day music. Keep in mind the tuning dial is separate from the volume dial, which controls power. I turned it off and was thoroughly creeped out, considering both this and the disembodied voice from before. I went outside and spent the rest of my shift in the patrol car. I asked a few different people about any paranormal activity there, but they said they hadn't experienced anything. I used to work the occasional night shift as a care worker in an aged care facility. We had recently lost a resident, a lovely, bedridden woman with long blonde hair. One night, I was doing my final walk-around check before my coffee break. As I passed the hallway where the recently deceased woman's room was, I saw a figure standing there. A night light at the end of the hall illuminated a small, slender woman in a long nightgown with thin, flowing blonde hair. because the light was behind her. Her face was completely obscured in shadow. I screamed, nearly soiling myself. The figure screamed back. I screamed again. She screamed, then turned away from me. It wasn't the ghost of the lady who had passed. It was the new resident who had moved into that room that very morning, disoriented and looking for the toilet. I had completely forgotten she'd moved in. I was pulling an all-nighter, baking for the restaurant where I worked. At 3 a.m., our system automatically clocked us out, so I had to go through the dining room to clock back in. On my way back to the kitchen, I heard low, murmuring voices coming from a dark corner of the dining room. Needless to say, every noise I heard for the rest of the night sent shivers down my spine. I was hyper-focused, constantly watching the kitchen door, and I worked at double speed to get the hell out of there 2 hours later. Having worked in medicine for nearly 20 years, I've encountered my share of bizarre situations. One night, a patient was admitted to our telemetry floor from another hospital. We settled him into a 2-bedroom, but he was the only patient occupying bed 2. About 30 minutes after his arrival, the call light went off for bed 1. This was strange, as there was no bed 1, only the setup for bed 2. I checked on him, and he said he was fine. 15 minutes later, the call light for bed 1 went off again. I went back in. The patient looked at me oddly, but insisted he was all right. 15 more minutes passed. It was nearing midnight. The call light for bed 1 went off again. I pulled back the curtain and found the patient blue, agonal breathing, and essentially dying. We called a code blue, initiated CPR, but he ultimately passed away. The physician pronounced him at 23:59. The truly eerie part of this story is what happened next. We called his wife, who lived 2 hours away. This was before cell phones were ubiquitous, and left a message. She eventually received it and called us back. The charge nurse delivered the news. She was distraught, but kept repeating, "He told me he was going to die tonight." I worked the night shift as a janitor at a local grocery store chain. My duties include cleaning the floors, bathrooms, and butcher's kitchen, as well as stripping and waxing floors and taking care of the trash. My usual routine involves taking breaks in the upstairs break room, especially when I need a respite from my coworker, whom I often complain about on Reddit. I go there to eat or to take a short break between tasks. It's during these times that I've experienced some unsettling phenomena. Disembodied footsteps. I frequently hear loud footsteps in the break room. Initially, I attributed them to my coworker having a tantrum, but I'd look down and see no one there. He would be far away, either cleaning the butcher's kitchen or mopping the floor, making it impossible for him to have made a noise. This has happened consistently, and other employees have heard it too. Shadowy figures. I often catch glimpses of shadows out of the corner of my eye. The more I try to ignore them, the more prominent they become. In areas where I've seen these shadows, I've later found things knocked over or slightly moved. Voices in the empty store. I've heard people calling my name or yelling at me, even on nights when I'm working alone. This is particularly unnerving, especially when I hear specific comments like, "You missed a spot," "You got the time," or other unintelligible phrases. Eerie sounds. I hear disembodied footsteps walking around while I'm working. The silence is especially unsettling when the music is off. I also hear the sound of items being shuffled. Mysterious footprint. Once, while my coworker was scrubbing, he noticed a single footprint in the dirty water he hadn't yet vacuumed up. It was a clear foot pattern, but without any distinguishing features of a shoe. Bathroom encounter. Another coworker had a strange experience in the men's restroom. While dealing with stomach issues, he saw a bright light above the push panels. He also heard loud, garbled voices sounding like both a man and a woman. When he pushed up the ceiling panel, he found nothing, and there's no way to illuminate that area so brightly. Moving objects. We've seen cabinets in the butcher's kitchen open slightly, and the rubber push doors sway on their own. Self-moving slicer. One night, as we were leaving, I thought I saw a shadowy figure in the butcher's kitchen and assumed it was my co-worker finishing up. Then, I saw the deli slicer moving on its own, without any discernible pattern. My co-worker hadn't even gone back into that area. Throaty growls. I've heard throaty growls while walking around the store. Pharmacy shadows. I've also seen shadows moving about in the closed-off pharmacy area. My ex-mother-in-law works at a psychiatric hospital with a network of underground tunnels connecting the buildings. She says they're primarily used for storage now, but the bottom level of her building houses vending machines and break rooms. She shared some chilling stories about seeing patients whom she knew had recently passed away using the elevators on that lower level. While I was a kid, I always slept with my bedroom light on, a habit born from unsettling experiences. One night, my door was open and I could see into the dark hallway. Suddenly, I saw a shadow move from my brother's room into the bathroom, and I froze, paralyzed with fear. Just then, I heard my brother bouncing on his mattress and loud banging on the wall that separated our rooms. The sound was strangely comforting in my terror. He was one of those people who rocked in his sleep and occasionally banged his head against the wall. A moment later, my brother walked out of the bathroom and stood in my doorway. "Why were you in my room?" he asked. So the shadow was him. But if that was true, what was making those noises? It definitely wasn't him. The next morning, he had no memory of any of it. It was a hot summer night, and I was sleeping on the top bunk of my sister's in my bunk bed. To stay cool, I'd hung a sheet like a makeshift fort. I woke up to a strange sound, someone sweeping our room. It was a brisk, rhythmic sweeping, like on the rough, high-traffic carpet you'd find in a waiting room. At first, I thought it was our dad, but it was the middle of the night. There was no reason for him to be in our room, sweeping. A wave of terror washed over me, and I was too scared to even peek through the sheet. Eventually, the sound faded away. I didn't say anything to anyone. Then, the next night, my 2-year-old sister, who was sleeping beside me, woke up and said, "Why won't it stop sweeping?" That scared me more than anything. To this day, I have no idea what we both heard. I was enjoying my window seat, gazing out at the view, when suddenly a distinct shape appeared. It was a charcoal black, sharply triangular object, hovering approximately 50 meters from the right wing. The object was quite large, roughly the size of a small car. Distracted by the arrival of my meal, I looked away briefly. When I turned back to the window, the object had vanished. It's important to remember that we were flying at an altitude of around 25,000 to 30,000 feet, traveling at a very high speed. Yet this object was simply hovering there, right outside my window. If you made it to the end of the video, thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share, and we will see you in the next video.